Something that Deng Xiaoping is known for is called the four modernizations. The domestic, social, political, and most notably economic systems in China underwent significant changes during Deng Xiaoping's time as leader. The goals of Deng's reforms were summed up by the four modernizations. He planned to modernize China's agriculture, industry, science and technology, and military. Deng's strategy for developing China into a modern industrial nation was the development of the socialist market economy, a combination of government planning and free markets. Deng's new economic strategy emphasized the policies that proved effective over policies that were ideologically pure and endorsed by Mao Zedong. So what that means is if his policy worked, if it was going to be more efficient, then that was the way he was going to go, instead of, we can't do that because it's not communist, or we can't do that because that's not what Mao would have done if it was his choice. Deng was more interested in helping the Chinese economy grow than making sure that all of his policies were strictly communist. In 1982, for example, Deng abolished the use of communes, which was seen by Mao and other communists as an essential part of the Chinese socialist system, because communes were an idea endorsed by communists throughout history in the world. Since communes proved unsuccessful during the Great Leap Forward in the Cultural Revolution, Deng stopped the practice. Other Chinese leaders would have continued Mao's policies because they referred to him as the country's father and thought he could do no wrong. Okay, so from this point on in the activity, I want you to be comparing what Mao would have done in this situation, or what Deng Xiaoping ends up doing. So who should determine China's economic policies? Mao was more of a pure communist. So he had the idea that if this policy was communist, then that's what we're going to do because we are a communist country. Deng Xiaoping felt that if that policy isn't working, then why would we continue to use it? Just because it's communist? That doesn't make sense. If we want China to grow and be a strong economic country, then we might need to add some capitalism into our economy. And if that works, then that's okay to do. Deng also abandoned Mao's style of launching mass campaigns of economic construction like the Great Leap Forward, and introduced planned, centralized management of the economy by skilled and experienced government workers. Deng sustained Mao's emphasis on the importance of agricultural output. He encouraged decision-making on the local level and by individual peasant households, as opposed to Mao, whose government set goals for each commune and forced communities to meet these quotas or be punished. At the local level, in Deng's China, material incentives rather than political appeals and punishments were used to motivate the labor force, including allowing peasants to earn extra income by selling the produce of their private plots at free markets. So again, Deng is allowing some capitalism into the economy. One of the downfalls of a pure communist state is that there's no incentive to work harder than you need to work. So Deng Xiaoping recognized that and decided to allow some incentives rather than punishments, which is what Mao Zedong was doing. Mao Zedong would set quotas on the communes. If your commune didn't meet this quota, then you would be punished, which led to death. So Deng Xiaoping recognized that that isn't helping with our agricultural output. We need more food to feed our people. What if we allowed those farmers to own their own land, to sell their surplus food to make some money? And maybe that will be an incentive if they know that if they grow more than they need, they can sell those in the free market, then they'll grow more food. And he was right, that's what happened. So this political cartoon is, I've seen it before on the Regents exam. This is Deng Xiaoping. It says China right here. And he's got 1 foot in a boat that says communist rule and 1 foot in a boat that says free markets. And he's thinking, oh, I'm dry for now. So this obviously isn't going to last forever. And it's definitely rough waters. What's which boat is he eventually going to have to jump into, or is he going to fall into the water? So under Deng, rural markets were revived to sell peasants' homegrown products and the surplus products of communes. Not only did the rural markets increase agricultural output, they created a demand for domestically manufactured goods and increased the political support for more difficult economic reforms. Peasants who were able to sell surplus agricultural yields on the open market had the means to purchase more domestic products, which stimulated industrial growth. So what that means is, because peasants were allowed to sell their extra crops and make money that way, well, then they had money to spend on goods that were being produced in industries. So that is helping the economy as well. So this question is, how should a government motivate workers to produce more? And Mao's answer was in the reading, and then we also just read what Deng's answer is. I want you to compare those. Deng shifted industrial development in China from the government-directed heavy industry that Mao supported to the production of goods that could be sold to other countries for profit. These reforms were a reversal of the Mao's policy of economic self-reliance, which meant that China could prosper without involving other countries. Under Deng, China decided to accelerate the modernization process by stepping up the volume of foreign trade, especially the purchase of machinery from Japan and the West. By focusing on exports, China was able to quickly take advantage of foreign investment, advanced technologies, and professional management. Deng attracted foreign companies to China who invested in the country's companies. Under Deng's direction, relations with the West improved markedly. Deng traveled abroad and had a series of friendly meetings with Western leaders. In 1979, he became the first Chinese leader to visit the United States when he met with President Carter at the White House. Sino-Japanese relations also improved significantly, and Deng used Japan as an example of a rapidly progressing economic power that China could emulate. So before, Mao Zedong had worked really hard to try to make China self-sufficient. He didn't want China to have to depend on foreign trade. One of the reasons why the economy in China during his reign was not very good, Deng Xiaoping reversed that and decided to open up trade to foreign countries to help increase their economy, and that was successful. Political control was a little bit different. I would like you to watch these videos. If the links don't work, when you click on them, they are on my YouTube channel, which I will link, and it's under playlists. So like we said before, Deng Xiaoping was very interested in reforms to increase the economy. He opens up China to trade. Therefore, Chinese people are going back and forth to the West and learning different things and bringing those ideas back to China, like democracy. So we have Chinese students who are learning about democracy and learning about freedom of speech and these freedoms that other countries have, and they want those rights to be in their country as well. Deng Xiaoping is not okay with any kind of political change. Economic change, yes. Political change, no, because political change would mean that he would have to give up some of his power. Usually when people have power, they do not want to give it up. The Tiananmen Square protests began in mid-April 1989. Pro-democracy students and other protesters who wanted more political freedom in China started to gather in Tiananmen Square after the death of Hu Yaobang, a Chinese politician who was seen as a supporter of their cause on April 15, 1989. Soon, others who were disgruntled with the government gathered. On April 18th, 10,000 students staged a sit-in in Tiananmen Square. On April 21st, 100,000 students marched on Tiananmen Square. Demonstrations began to occur all over China, and protests escalated in Beijing. Though some government officials favored a soft approach to the protesters, most of the Communist Party elders believed that the prolonged demonstrations were a threat to the political stability of China. On May 20th, Deng Xiaoping, as chairman of the Central Military Commission, declared martial law, which means the suspension of laws in favor of military order. But the demonstrations continued. The decision by Communist Party leaders to use military force caused deep division in the government. Even the military was reluctant to oppose the students, so soldiers and tanks from the 25th and 28th Armies of the People's Liberation Army, which was based in rural areas, were sent to take control of the city. These forces were confronted by Chinese students in the streets of Beijing, and the ensuing violence resulted in both civilian and army deaths. Estimates of civilian deaths which resulted vary from 400 to 800 or 1,000 or even 2,600. Student protesters maintained that over 7,000 protesters were tortured and killed. Following the violence, the government conducted widespread arrests to suppress, torture, and kill the remaining supporters of the movement, limited access for the foreign press, and controlled coverage of the events in mainland Chinese press. The violent suppression of the Tiananmen Square protests caused widespread international condemnation of the Chinese government. Deng Xiaoping, along with other hardliners, were generally blamed for the events. Critics accused Deng of suppressing any signs of political freedom that would undermine the direction of his economic reforms. Deng's involvement in the events of Tiananmen Square showed that he still possessed dictatorial powers, and that the Chinese Communist Party still relied on the use of force and violence to control public protest. For years after the crackdown, opponents of Deng, centered mainly around college campuses, would anonymously burn and smash little glass bottles as a gesture of contempt towards him, especially on the crackdown anniversary. So this is called the Tiananmen Square Massacre. Deng Xiaoping allowed the Chinese government to suppress the protests. So I want you to answer those 3 questions. And here's another summary task. So here's a political cartoon. I want you to write down what you see in the image, what you think, and if you have any questions about it, and then answer this question. Based on what you have learned about Deng Xiaoping's policies, identify the cartoonist's claim and explain what historical events support it. So think back to what we just read. This is Deng Xiaoping, it's labeled, and he's holding a sign, free markets, not people. So explain what the cartoonist is referring to based on this image.